So we're looking for reflected lights, bedbug lines, and anywhere also that you can find occlusion shadows. And sort of we're just generally kind of progressively making all the shadows darker. So we're finding variations within them, but also sort of smoothing them out, evening them out together a bit. Because as I say, if you blur your eyes and look at the reference, you'll find shadows do merge together quite a lot. Probably the only major exception being this reflected light in here. But all the other shadows are not too different in tone from each other, and they're all pretty dark. So a lot of this shadow in kind of behind that jawbone that sticks out in front is all particularly kind of close together in value, so I can kind of just gradually build all that up together. But I want to make sure I leave out any of these places where we see little bits of light poking through. So that this bit here I'm working on was that penumbra I mentioned right at the beginning. Then as it drops down, sort of more forward down into that front of the face, top of the mouth, it goes pretty dark, and it doesn't get, you know, it's not super different in value, these tones, to the background. They're only just marginally lighter than the background, really. Slightly wrong there, so I'm just going to erase that shape. So now I'm going to start just looking at these slightly smaller little shadow shapes. that make up the front of the face. But I've almost got a sort of first pass over all these tones in place now. So again, the front of the skull here doesn't receive too much light, so it's not super dissimilar. It's not that far off the darker value of the background. Yeah, so very, very close to having most of these shadows blocked in now. So once they're blocked in, we're going to start working on them a bit. So, you know, the closer they get to being correct, the more that we can kind of tweak them and mess around with them a little bit to get them all to sit right and all be in the right relationship with one another. So I'm just working down this bedbug line down the front of the face. And I've got this slightly darker edge, so we've got a reflected light in here, but then as it quite rapidly becomes kind of sort of slightly dark just at this shadow edge, so that sort of, it's almost like a little occlusion in between the reflected light and the light. So we've got this bit of bone in here is reflecting a lot of light up into that space in the skull. So just about got a sense of this reflected light in. There is a bit more of a bend back, so I kind of had it curving back in this way too much, but looking at the reference, there's sort of a kind of quick shift to it being lighted just at this point and kind of bending back slightly. And yes, that's not too far off a kind of reasonable blocking of these shadows. The last thing I'm going to do is just go a bit darker, so do a few passes like we did with the sphere. I'm now just going to pass over a few times, just going to merge them together, the shadows. So if I do these general passes over, the advantage of them is they kind of just make everything darker altogether. So I keep my relationships. If there's something like a reflected light that's lighter, it'll go darker, but it won't go as dark as something that's already got tone that I'm going over. with the exception of obviously if the you know, you're going over pure black, like something that's drawn in really dark. That can't go any darker, but anything that can go generally darker, they'll all go darker together. So primarily we've now sort of worked on getting a sense of these bedbug lines where it gets darker up near the lighter tones, how they sort of sweep down and have these reflected lights. And there are certain places in this reference that have really dark reflected lights, darker than what we did in the sphere exercise. And then we have a few places where it goes really dark, where the tone gets much, much darker. But yeah, as a sort of first pass over the shadows, that's pretty good, sort of as a stage to be at before working on the lights. So I'll just give you guys just a couple of minutes to work and catch up. So the next thing we're going to do is start to lay in some of our halftones, and then we'll see sort of how much time we have to kind of develop the drawing from there. But as we did with the sphere, we're going to start laying in the halftones, working from the shadow edge, so where we have these quite definite shadows, we can put our darkest halftones just up that shadow edge, so we're going to start to turn the form that way. So just these darkest halftones. There are some places where the halftone won't turn out as gradually, so it might be a little bit sort of a sharper edge. This point in here, for instance, in the skull, is a little bit sharper than the areas that surround it. They're a little bit softer. So one of the main things we're going to be looking for as we progress with the drawing is just the difference between areas which are or places where the form is turning, where it's softer, and some places where it's sharper. But yeah, I'm just going to make my way around just all the drawing, just starting to pull tone out of the shadows. So some places it's going to be softer, and some places it's going to be harder. So this edge up here, for instance, this bone here is quite sharp. A lot of the tones on the other side are quite soft, so they kind of gradually make their way out of the shadows. This shadow here, even it's got a little bit of a penumbra, but it's moderately crisp, that shadow. Whereas this one in here, this penumbra is a little bit softer, I would say. So we're kind of making some softer, some sharper. some dark halftones extend quite far, so this portion of bone sort of in here, around the cheekbone, that's quite dark, quite far in, so I'm going to drag that tone pretty far out. And also then I'll drop down and do this penumbra, so this is this shadow sort of behind that cheekbone. And then start working on this little piece of jaw that sticks in front. So primarily just focusing on where I know the halftones are darkest, so mostly as they emerge out of the shadow edge. So mostly I think made my way out of the darkest halftones. I sort of worked on the darkest halftones. So the next thing is going to be now kind of blocking in more of those mid-tones. So similar to what we did when we were working on this sphere, when we were starting to work in these kind of larger sections of tone altogether. And when I get to that stage, what I'd recommend, or when you get to that stage, what I recommend doing is working kind of broader sweeps, larger sections, kind of planes of tone. So we can look at different areas in the reference, and we know that this bit up here, for instance, is just generally these halftones they're darker than this light in here. They're darker than that bit there and darker than that bit there. So I can start to do sort of general passes out of the shadows. So I'm always moving out of the shadows towards the lights, but just sort of making that part of the skull darker. The other place where I know the halftones are moderately dark is just generally through this portion of this jawbone that sticks up. So I can kind of just pass over all of that together. So anywhere I know I can kind of work on a whole section together, I just kind of merge in. Makes it a little bit more efficient. Then I can start to kind of, within the lighter forms, start to add some lighter kind of mid halftones, so between light and mid, or mid and light tones. can also start to look for places where halftones sort of connect different shadows together. So through this bone, for instance, in the jaw, I've got a little shadow up here and then two shadows down here, and there are halftones that just make their way across the lighter portion of the drawing, and they connect those shadows together. So that's a really important aspect of form, is how different things connect together. And then we've also got some sort of mid-tones that make their way, kind of make this curve happen in this portion of the cheekbone that we can see. So sort of darker at both connection points of that bone, and then it gets lighter in the center.